Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to our /MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, it's all about nightmare Karen landlords messing with tenants and getting taught lessons. And one OP tells a story about the time a nasty landlord picks on a quiet couple and gets absolutely destroyed. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories today. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this happened well over a decade ago, but I was recently talking with my friend and it came up again, so I thought I'd share. So my friend Ned had a brother named Bill who was renting a home. He was one of those long-term renters who stayed at the same location for 10 plus years. Bill was moving out, and the nasty landlord was trying his best to get every penny out of Bill that he could. The landlord looked around the house and tried to charge him for every little thing. Small stains on the wall, the cupboard that was broken before he moved in, etc. But the biggest, most expensive offense was the carpet. Let me tell you, the carpet was not pretty. There were stains everywhere and a big hole where a cigarette was dropped. There were threads showing, etc, etc. But here's the thing. The carpet was clearly old when he moved in, but Bill wasn't very prepared and he didn't think to take pictures before he moved in. So Ned devises a plan to help his brother out. He knew the law pretty well and he went with Bill to sign the final paperwork. Now, I don't know why the landlord thought he could charge the renter beyond his deposit. Maybe they had an agreement that he left out of the story, or the laws were different when this happened. Regardless, he was gonna have to pay for all of the brand new carpet because of the one hole he caused. So the landlord smugly pulls out the paperwork to have Bill sign. Ned took one look at it, he smirked, and then he told Bill to sign it. They got done with all of it and then shook hands. And that's when the landlord starts bragging about how much he was going to make off Bill. And then Ned drops the bomb. He told the landlord that the paper said he had to reimburse the carpet for what it was worth. And according to the law that he had a copy of in his pocket, carpets are worthless after 10 years of use, which his brother alone fit as a qualification. The landlord can't charge you for carpets after 10 years, and the landlord was flabbergasted. Apparently, the landlord ends up using some leftover carpet that he had in storage to replace the square where the cigarette burn was located, instead of replacing the whole carpet. Nice try, shady landlord. And this is why it pays to know tenancy laws where you live, because so many scummy landlords try to intimidate ignorant renters into replacing things or paying for damages that they should cover. And I've said this before, it's always a good idea to take pictures of everything upon move-in day, so if landlords try to pull something like this, you can easily dispute it. But yeah, how dirty was that though? The carpet was already filthy and run down to begin with, and the landlord tries to get that nasty carpet replaced for free. And this person shares a comment that says, "Many years ago, a day after I finished moving out of my first apartment, my scummy landlord calls me up to say that I wouldn't be getting my security deposit back because I had not cleaned the oven. I didn't want to lose the few $100, so I asked if I could come back and clean it. They said it had to be cleaned on X date, so I agreed it would happen. Well, the landlord knew something I didn't. On the day I showed up, ready to clean the oven, I opened the door and I see that they just had, that day, revarnished the parquet flooring in the entire apartment, and it still wasn't dry. So I called the landlord and I explained my predicament, but they smugly insisted if the oven wasn't cleaned, I would lose the deposit and that I'd better get to it. Cue the malicious compliance. If the landlord wanted the oven clean, he was going to get a clean oven. So I tied my shoes on tight and I slowly walk across the sticky varnish, leaving footprints with every step. It took me 30 minutes to clean the oven inside and out, and the varnish fumes burned my eyes and lungs, but I got that oven sparkling. The next day, I get a call from the superintendent of the building. The guy was yelling at me saying that I ruined the whole floor, and that the new tenants were supposed to move in that day. He yelled that it cost $400 to fix, and they had to delay the tenant moving in order for it to dry. That's when I calmly relayed the fact that I had asked the landlord about it, and I was told that unless the oven was clean, I lost my cash. He apologized, and he said he was gonna have some choice words for the landlord. Luckily, I had already dropped off my keys, and I got my deposit back. See, that's the kind of stuff that makes you hate a landlord. Like, the guy knew the floor was being varnished that day, and he was probably hoping that OP would show up, see the wet varnish, and surrender their deposit. That, or do what they did and suffer through it to get their money back. And guys, if you think that was bad, we're just getting started. Listen to this next post. Where I live, there's well-known laws that lean heavily on the side of the property owner, which leaves the renter pretty vulnerable to owners who want to be difficult, to say the least. Or at least they did when I lived there. I doubt much has changed since. So I move into town and I find a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, intending for it to be a short period of time while I scout the town and look for a more permanent place. As for paying rent, they wouldn't/couldn't take an automatic monthly check from my bank or charge my debit card monthly. It had to be a paper check from me with a 4-day late fee window. I hate writing checks and I had the cash, so I paid out the 12-month lease all at once. I find a great place about 6 months later, and I think I'll just break my lease and pay the extra 1-month penalty and walk away from my apartment. So I call and let them know that I'll be moving out. Long conversation short, the way the lease is written makes you think that's how it works, when in reality, at a second or third read, I'm still liable for the entire 12-month lease, and to break the lease essentially adds a 13-month of rent money owed. Now, knowing that up front, why anybody would break a lease is beyond me. So at this point, I've already made the deposits on my new place when all of this comes to light, so I'm stuck with 2 places. I tell the apartment complex that I won't be moving out. I figure I'll just go ahead and let the lease run out. I'll set the AC to 80 and open the breakers to keep costs low. I slowly move my stuff to my new place, since I have plenty of time now, and in the end, I leave behind my ironing board and iron just to leave something, and I never really use them anyways. About 2 months later, I get a call from the power company, asking if it's okay to transfer power in someone else's name. Shocked, I reply absolutely not, while laughing a little on the inside. I decide to give it a day before I call the apartment complex. The first thing the next morning, I get a call from the apartment complex, and with a super snarky entitled tone, I hear, "We need you to drop the power from your name so the new tenant can take over and move in." That's when I explain I still have an active lease on the place, and I can't fathom why she'd rent it out. She accuses me of abandonment, and therefore, she's allowed to rent the apartment. My reply went along the lines of, I rent that apartment with the sole intent of having somewhere to iron my clothes. Did you not see my iron and ironing board there? Hearing that, things got quiet for a moment, and she said that she did, and she took it to the office to get it out of the apartment. We go back and forth on the semantics for a little, and I let her know that I'm open to receiving a refund to the date on the new tenant's lease, and at that time, I'd be happy to drop my name from the power. She refuses, and the call ends with getting her boss's number from corporate. I mentioned to her boss that I can recognize a breach of contract when I see it, and that nowhere in the lease does it say I actually have to live there. Not to mention, her employee admitted to entering my apartment and stealing items of mine from inside. When I said that to her, she quickly assured me that they're putting a check in the mail that day, refunding my money to the first of that month. And she told me I could go to the office to pick up my stuff anytime. And yes, I know they could have run up the power bill, but they'd only be able to do so much really, and a few days isn't that huge, and they didn't do it anyways. Even if they had, it would still be worth the expense, considering the refund. A place to iron my clothes. Was OP's response brilliant or what? Like, I actually laughed out loud, imagining the lady's thought process upon hearing that sentence and realizing that she might have messed up big time. But yeah, that sounds super illegal, doesn't it, on the part of the apartment complex? Like, how did they think that having OP continue to pay rent there and also having new renters move in, collecting rent from them was a good idea? Like, some places are just so scummy it hurts, guys, but anything for more money, right? So I live in a very tenant-friendly area. We have rent control, and landlords are not allowed to do things like demand security deposits, enter the property without proper written notice, or include no pet clauses in leases, which renew automatically every month after a fixed term ends. For the last 11 years, my husband and I have had a great relationship with our landlord, who I'll call Joe, fake name. We've been very lenient in regards to repairs, and Joe was very forgiving when my husband and I both lost our jobs at the same time, and we fell a few months behind on rent. We're now ahead on rent, but Joe's still very behind on maintenance and repairs. We have a whole laundry list of issues that my landlord's aware of, but hasn't done anything about for years. But we didn't care because he left us alone, and he's been overall very kind to us. That said, a few years ago, our landlord allowed us to start storing stuff in this old rundown shed behind our rented portion of the yard. We never stored anything valuable out there because it's falling apart, and squirrels have been using it to cache walnuts from the numerous walnut trees in our yard. We had an old barbecue, lawnmower, ladders, and outside toys for my kids in there until recently. A few months ago, Joe shows up asking about the shed, wanting to know what we had stored out there. I told him just some old junk that we'll probably throw out soon. That's when he told us that the family next door has a mouse problem, and he wants us to clear out the shed to prevent issues, and because, quote, I want it to look nice around here. So I say, okay, I'll talk to my husband and we'll get it cleared out when we have the chance. I have an infant at home, so I can't go out back to clean it out myself unless someone else is here to watch the baby. My husband had a scheduled surgery, so he wasn't able to do any heavy lifting until after he recovered. Admittedly, cleaning out the old shed was not a high priority. That's when Joe sends a passive-aggressive text saying, I just want to remind you that tomorrow is garbage day, and we need to work together to keep the rental property nice for everyone to enjoy. I replied asking him if he had plans to fix the shed, to remove his old pickup truck, or to get rid of the open compost piles and scrap metal. I also explained that my husband just had surgery and that we weren't planning on cleaning the shed that day, and he did not like that. The guy shows up unannounced and walks inside my home and proceeds to yell at us very loudly in front of our kids. He complained about his personal finances and the economy. He swore at us about our effing crap and told us we can't use the shed anymore. And he threatened to evict us because, quote, clearly you don't like living here, and I can get way more for this house than what you're paying now. We of course told him to leave and that we will not communicate with him anymore unless in writing. He said, fine, we'll do it all by the book from now on. He then storms out. The next day, he puts an eviction notice in our mailbox, complaining that we have excessive garbage and waste in outbuildings, and that we've refused to discuss the issue and corrective action with the landlord. He even added that he felt it was unreasonable, given the fact that he didn't evict us for late rent 2 years ago. The notice gives us 7 days to correct the issues, or else my landlord can file for an eviction hearing. The next day, while I cleaned out everything belonging to us, along with the walnuts and squirrel poop from the shed, my husband got busy contacting local bylaw and the Rental Housing Enforcement Agency, which is basically traffic cops for landlords. He was given information on how to file against the landlord for refusing to do repairs, for illegal entry, loss of an amenity, the shed, and harassment. After a surprise inspection that happened last week, we were given a report that said that Joe was given 90 days to fix the roof, the plumbing, and the weeping tile. On top of that, he has to demolish the shed and either put up a new shed or give us a rent reduction because the shed was an assumed amenity. Also, according to my neighbors with a mice issue, the government is also involved now because apparently he filled in a pond without a permit, and now the fire department doesn't have a nearby water source in case of fire. as there's no hydrants out there. On top of that, the city threatened to fine him for every day he leaves his large pile of broken concrete and rebar out back. The cherry on top happened yesterday though. He sent me a text to tell me that him and the plumber were going to be there within the hour. Now normally, I'd be okay with such short notice, despite the law saying that he must provide a 24-hour written notice, but not this time. I told him we need 24 hours notice. Well, he showed up anyways, and he knocks on the door and he starts screaming at us. When I reminded him that I won't speak to him in person anymore, he calls the police, saying that I was being hostile towards him and he doesn't feel safe coming here. The guy sat outside for 4 hours waiting for police, who later called me instead of showing up. The officer who called said that Joe was told to stop harassing us and that he needs to provide 24 hours notice to enter the home. He also wanted to make sure that Joe left and he gave proper notice, and he asked me if I wanted an officer there tomorrow to keep the peace. If Joe doesn't do the repairs he's supposed to, we plan to take him to court and file for a rent reduction, and for a lien to be put on the property so he can't just sell it. We're doing it just by the book from now on, and we just want it to look nice. What a malicious compliance that was, guys, and honestly, I freaking love how Joe effed around and he found out. And again, this is why it's so important to know tenants' rights. And here's the thing, I'm pretty sure Joe assumed he was dealing with people who didn't know what their rights were, because OP and her husband didn't exercise them in the last 11 years, but little did he know. Like, to be a fly on the wall when Joe found out he had to do all those expensive repairs, my goodness. So this story happened a long time ago, and I think you'd enjoy. I worked for a leisure company. Think indoor soccer and laser tag, as I can't be specific. The managers and the big bosses were negotiating the renewal on the lease of one of our parks. Things were going mostly smoothly. However, the landlords were difficult to contact. Then the 2020 crap hit the fan. Remember that? All of our sites were closed and everything was thrown into a mess. Negotiations began to slip down the priority list. Nobody thought the landlord would push an eviction for an expired lease during this period, especially with it still getting rent despite the site's closure and the closure of every business and restaurant in the area. But boy, we were wrong. We received a letter saying we had 7 days to leave the premises and take everything with us. We were reminded that anything left in the building after 7 days will become the landlord's property. That line is very important. Now, a lot of construction goes into installing our equipment into a new building, which makes emptying one even harder. Add what happened in 2020 with no staff and most businesses shut, it meant that saving much of our assets would prove to be extremely difficult. To lose a profitable site and all of its assets is definitely a blow to our company. But here's where it gets worse. A few days into our 7-day eviction, we find out that the landlord's been advertising our park to our competitors. But he isn't offering just the building, he's offering all of our stuff pre-installed, ready to go, just needs rebranding. In his words, the landlords evicted us from the property in an attempt to increase rent and make a solid profit from our equipment installed, because he thinks we won't be able to empty the park. We were furious, and this is where the malicious compliance comes in. We were told that we had 7 days to move everything we owned out of the property, so that's what we did. Local businesses from all around offered up free space to store our things. And a few people came and they spent the rest of the week removing, selling, or destroying anything that was related to us. We didn't even leave the light fittings. In every other site vacation we've seen, we always end up leaving thousands of dollars worth of disco lights in the ceilings because they're too hard to get. We also leave most of the construction in, as well as things like the bars and kitchens that all stay intact, but not this building. We ripped up the flooring we installed, tore down the walls that weren't a part of the original structure, ripped apart our manager's offices, and removed all the artwork and lockers. The landlord ends up having every new deal he's been making dead in the water. And to add to that, he has a large renovation bill to install new flooring, redo walls, etc. And the thing is, with us out of there and no potential buyers, there was nobody to pay the rent. And here's what happened next. We handed in the keys, and it was probably the quickest handover we've ever had. The landlord didn't want to make any kind of conversation, and there was definitely an elephant in the room, but he said nothing about the lack of equipment. Complications did arise when we went to get back our various deposits, but he had no case to withhold the deposits from us as the building was in excellent shape. A very minor bit of pressing from our legal team meant that we received everything owed back in full. Friggin' amazing how the team pulled everything off in the 7 days, and who also wishes they added insult to injury by filling the building with useless junk and debris, because as stated by the landlord, anything left in the building after 7 days will become their property, right? What a missed opportunity that was, but again, screwing over a shady landlord who's trying to screw over the tenants and costing him who knows how much money in the process is so frickin' satisfying, guys. A few years ago, my best friend and I rented a tiny 2-bedroom flat together. This place was kind of terrible. My friend's room had this hole cut into the wall, so the last foot of the bed would fit. And the kitchen was the size of a child's playhouse kitchen, and the upstairs neighbors spent all hours of the day and night screaming at each other. Either that or having loud adult time. But we were mostly happy because we were over living with 6+ other people. We paid £75 a week each, plus bills for this place, which was pretty standard for a 2-bedroom flat in the area. Then, 6 months into our 1-year contract, the landlord sold the place to a middle-aged married couple who were first-time landlords. They were the kind of people who thought that they were smarter than everyone else, and I got the impression that they thought property management was going to be the easiest thing ever. We had no problem throughout the sale process, as we were assured nothing would change. We didn't interact much with the landlord before anyways. Then, 2 weeks after the sale, we get an email from the new couple that we owed them £20 each more a week. Basically, in our contract, it states that our rent was £75 each week, about 10 times. But there was one typo where it said our rent was £95 each, so they thought they could legally charge us £95. We of course laugh at this, but when it became clear that they were serious, we reached out to the letting agent, and we got them to put it in writing that it was a typo, that our rent was always £75. And they gave us the original advertisement for the flat with the correct rent on it. We thought this would be the end of it, but we were wrong. The couple insisted on coming to our flat for an in-person meeting. When they got there, they said they asked the old landlord about it, and he was shocked that we had not been paying enough for 6 months now, and the rent was always £95. Now, I didn't buy this because they had nothing in writing, and I made the argument that of course he would say that because he wouldn't want it to seem like he sold under false pretenses. And if we had been underpaying by a total of like £160 a month, then why had he never spoken to us about it? That's when they declared if we didn't start paying them the higher rent, they would evict us, and we had 24 hours to pay or 30 days to get out, and then they left. Honestly, I think they saw 2 20-year-old girls and they thought they could scare us into paying more money. What they didn't know is that my friend and I are very pleasant until you piss us off, and we become vindictive mother effers. We decide that night if they want to evict us from this crap hole, we were going to make them do it properly, and if they were so pedantic about contracts and rules, we were going to stop letting anything slide. The couple woke up the next morning with an email from our lawyer, who happened to be my friend's brother, requesting a formal eviction notice in writing and laying out a record of last night's conversation. The thing was, they didn't actually have legal grounds to evict us, even if we went to court and a judge favored their interpretation of the contract, which we were advised this was unlikely. By 9:15 a.m., they were texting and trying to call us non-stop. But we ignored them, and we emailed that our lawyer advised us to only communicate in writing through email. We then sent an email informing them that the fancy new front door they just installed could not be unlocked from the inside without a key, which violated fire safety laws, and unfortunately, if this wasn't rectified as soon as possible, we would have to report it. We then sent texts that showed them repeatedly entering our flat with less than 24 hours notice, and did they know this was illegal? Maybe we should talk to the other tenants, because if they're doing this to everyone, this could be quite a problem. After about 3 days of this, we receive a very nice email saying that they don't agree that our rent was supposed to be £75 each a week, but they would graciously allow us to finish out the contract at that rate. By this point, we had found a new place, triple the size, for £80 each a week, and we wanted out of that hamster cage. So we offered to move if they sign a mutual surrender form. They eagerly agreed. And here's the best part. They stubbornly tried to rent that place at the higher rate, despite us telling them that it was a terrible idea. The place sat empty for over a year. See, this is what happens when new landlords swoop in and they get greedy. They learn real quick that there's a difference between a small amount of rent per week and the place staying vacant. And I wish more landlords understood that. Keep good tenants happy and life will be much easier. But hey, without bad landlords out there, we wouldn't have these wild stories. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r / malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you guys missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r / entitled People episode, where bad bosses are getting absolutely destroyed. One Karen boss tries so hard to get OP fired, and OP gets her first. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.